So what can you expect from this evening? It's kind of in your program, but there are three parts. This is a special occasion, and we're aiming to raise awareness about what these United Nations goals are and the sense of cooperation that both enables the UN to function and that is necessitated by the existence of the United Nations. Secondly, we're going to gain some perspectives on global priorities for a better, more sustainable world. And the third thing, as you'll see in the latter part of the program, and you've already applauded them, we're going to be honoring these three corporations for their outstanding achievements about UN goals and the inspiration and motivation that I hope you will find from their distinguished work. And I hope you'll also continue to enjoy the evening. That's a fourth goal. So, why is this evening so special? It's already been mentioned, it's the 70th anniversary since the UN was established. We've been told, of course, as you know, that the charter was signed in San Francisco at this historic building, which has just been renovated. And there was a wonderful program organized there yesterday by the San Francisco chapter of UNA. And it was the place where the charter was signed. That's one of the wonderful historic pictures from the archives. So this year, the UN, in its 70th anniversary, has been celebrated on the occasion of the Charter Day on the 26th of June. And one of the most spectacular occasions was the official event that the United Nations offered. One event in the world, because Ban Ki-moon wanted to come to San Francisco, the birthplace. So he was here with Representative Pelosi, Governor Brown, Mayor Lee, and a young lady, Malala, who probably got more awards than more applause than anybody else. And she was at that event. It was a stellar event and a beautiful celebration right in our midst. But in addition to San Francisco, the event was also celebrated here in the East Bay. About 3,000 steps from where you are right now, there was a ceremony on the same day in the building, or out in front of the building, the old University Berkeley printing offices, where the UN Charter had been printed in June 1945. And there were people who reprinted it and celebrated it, people of all ages. And also there was an event in Oakland. Oakland is the first place where the UN flag was flying on a permanent daily basis in the whole Bay Area, well that of San Francisco. And there was a mural dedicated specifically as a tribute to the United Nations. And that was a wonderful local ceremony. You could drive by, and when you look up and see this strange thing in the sky at the corner of Telegraph and Broadway, it's to honor the people and the symbol and the spirits of the United Nations. Next, so why are we celebrating? We are celebrating, but why? Let's go into it just a little deeper. Since 1945, in October, when the United Nations became operational, the Charter was signed in June, and it became operational in October on this date. Well, we are celebrating because it's time to take recognition that with a strong United Nations, the world will become better. Well, what is so special and why should it be supported? I want to name, if you could bear with me, 10 quick reasons. Number one, the United Nations has been legitimate. It was signed by all the countries in the world. They gave it legitimacy. Number two, it is inclusive. All those countries at that time joined the United Nations, and now, after 70 years, 193 countries in the world, representing 7 billion people. That is through the evolution of the post-colonial period, which was accelerated because of the work of the United Nations and the peer pressure of the countries of the world to say every person must have an opportunity to have a government and representing its own people. Number three, the United Nations has been durable. It has lasted for 70 years. How many organizations last in this kind of a form for 70 years? The history of the League of Nations is fairly well known to this elite group. It lasted less than 20 years and it ended in the Second World War. It failed, and our country didn't even join it because of the problems of what the people in our country felt and questions about the efficacy and the potential for the League of Nations. Number four, the United Nations has been adaptive. If it has not been adaptive in 70 years, something's wrong, right? Okay, climate change is now an issue. The International Atomic Energy Agency was set up because there's nuclear weapons and there's questions of proliferation and the utilization of nuclear arms. Terrorism has had all kinds of resolutions adopted in the last few years because non-state entities need to be confronted by the member states, and they have done that. Women's rights has become an issue. The United Nations has adapted in many ways to continue to be relevant. Number 5. Relevant in terms of many, many things. Again, responding to refugees and displaced persons, a record number right now since the end of the Second World War, to remove the chemicals from Syria. That was a UN operation. To work on the sanctions, support the sanctions, facilitate the sanctions against Iran, which has led to the agreements that involve the United Nations and the large countries to help back off the threats of nuclear weapons. So many ways that the United Nations has been relevant. It has been responsive. It has been responsive how? Just a few examples. Smallpox was eradicated. Polio is on the way out. Just last week, Nigeria declared itself free of polio. Malaria is going down. Ebola was addressed last year, not only by that building in New York or in Geneva, but by the countries themselves who were cooperating in a responsive way to these things. The humanitarian crisis, the United Nations is there. Number 7, I'm going to run out of fingers. No, I won't run out of fingers. I still have 10. Number 7, the United Nations is a unique place that is facilitated. If it isn't there, where do people go to consult? Every country can consult, representing every person. And not just consultations, but to agree on intentions. There is intentionality. There are objectives. There are goals that have been set. It doesn't mean they'll all be done, but this is the place where the greatest number of parties in the world can get together to set their goals and standards, and that will relate to the middle part of our program tonight. Number 8, the United Nations has been effective. And as an example, in the last 15 years, in the context of the goals set in the year 2000, there's been a reduction of absolute poverty in the world by 50%. There's been a reduction of hunger by 50%. Maternal mortality has gone down by 50%. These are examples of an effectiveness of the world working together under the aegis of the United Nations. Number 9, the United Nations has been collaborative. It collaborates. It brings partners together to reach understandings and to try to take as much action as they can to empower the United Nations and its partners to make an impact. And finally, the United Nations is unique. It is a go-to organization. It is irreplaceable. It is indispensable, as many people have said. What other organization in the world could have those 10 characteristics that I just mentioned? So imagine what would happen in the world if there was no United Nations for the last 70 years. So, what about this year? This is a momentous year, and I remember last year we had the Secretary General's representative speaking to our annual meeting of the United Nations Association in Washington, and he said, next year, this year, 2015, is going to be a momentous year. And of course, we all go, sure. And he said, yeah, but this is really going to be momentous. And in fact, it has been momentous. Number 1, 1 month ago this weekend, 193 countries unanimously agreed about intentionality and goals for the next 15 years, which is a core of our program tonight. The second thing that is happening in this momentous year is that the climate change agreement has been under negotiations for years. Can the world agree on the next goals to protect our planet? So as Ban Ki-moon has said, this is a moment for our generation and for future generations. Let that sink in. Okay, now to dig in one level deeper, I'm thrilled that we have a guy who's come all the way from Washington, D.C. to be with us tonight, Micah Spangler. He's the Deputy Director of our Better World campaign, which is a sister of the UN Association, and we're all affiliated with the United Nations Foundation. He looks maybe relatively young for the kind of rich experiences that he has had, and he's a very smart guy. His job is to work on the political processes, the strategies, and the advocacy to support the United Nations or gain support for the United Nations in Congress and with the public. He works with our UN Association local group here and all the groups around the country in the 150 chapters of the UN Association around the country. When we go to Capitol Hill every June, and he's our linchpin because he knows his smarts, he knows his stuff. So he's a key on the policies, the politics, and the partnerships of advocacy for the United Nations and about connecting our country with the United Nations on the path toward a better world. Micah, thank you very much for coming. Welcome to sunny California.
Wow, thank you for that very, very kind introduction. Everyone, I spent some great time together yesterday. We were driving all over. I felt like all over California, visiting some chapters, film festival, talking to UNA members throughout the state, and it was just an amazing experience and some great time together. As Herb mentioned, my name is Micah Spangler. I'm the Deputy Director of Legislative Affairs for the Better World Campaign. The Better World Campaign is a sister organization of UNA USA and the advocacy arm of the United Nations Foundation. I'm really honored to join you today to both celebrate the UN's 70th anniversary and to reflect upon its future. But first, I really must say, I kind of feel like I won the lottery by being selected to come speak with you all today. I've got colleagues, 20 or so, that are traveling all over the country. They've been to Missouri, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, really nice places, but they definitely are not California, and they definitely are not Berkeley, so it's a real treat to be here. UNA members here in California are some of the most pumped and dedicated advocates I've ever met. And if you know UNA members anywhere else across the country, you know that's really saying a lot. Our work in DC is to channel that enthusiasm, that advocacy that exists throughout the country, and direct it to our efforts in DC to share the good work that the UN does with our nation's leaders. That's exactly what we try to do every day. We talk to the House, we talk to the Senate, and we talk to the White House about what the UN does and why it's important that the US supports those efforts. From UNHCR's work delivering life-saving humanitarian aid, from WHO's efforts combating the Ebola outbreak, to peacekeeping operations working to stabilize volatile regions all over the world, the UN does an amazing amount of work that simply no one country could do alone. But this message doesn't always get to the people who need to hear it the most. For most Americans and a lot of our elected officials in DC, a lot of people that are not as lucky to have a representative as amazing as Barbara Lee. A lot of people, what they hear about the UN is negative, and a lot of times just simply downright wrong. The most an average voter typically hears about the UN is some overly politicized Human Rights Council resolution or a scandal erupting from some oddly acronymed agency. And I sort of understand that. You, me, all of us here today and all of the chapters I've met with the last couple days, we're kind of the weird ones. We're the ones that pay attention, we're the ones that are interested, and a lot of average people, they just don't have the interest, or they just don't have the bandwidth to keep up with the daily workings of the UN. However, others on the far fringes of the political spectrum, they do, and they see the UN as a shadowy organization attempting to usurp American sovereignty, to tell us how to raise our children or how to live our lives. And for these people, it's easier to make the UN more powerful than it actually is, to ascribe to it some secretive agenda, than to actually just realize that the UN is a non-perfect institution serving an indispensable role. As was mentioned, if we didn't have the UN, we'd have to create it. And as you might guess, these folks on the farther end of the political spectrum, They're incredibly active when it comes to telling their elected officials what they think and what they think about the UN. And that's why UNA is so important. It's the only organization of its kind that exists to talk about and to share the UN's good work and to share that work with our elected officials in DC. And so I'm really happy, very happy to report that we're feeling your efforts back in DC. What we do a lot in the office, we do this every 6 months or so, we conduct a poll. And we ask regular Americans what they're thinking about the UN and what they think about international engagement writ large. And the results of our most recent poll were just released this week. And in a bipartisan survey conducted by a team of prominent Republican and Democratic pollsters, the UN was found to have a favorability rating of 63%. May not sound like a lot, it is a lot, and that's actually the highest that number has been since 2002. It may not come as a surprise, but the UN beat out our own beloved U.S. Congress. Congress came in at 23% favorability, so almost triple. And maybe a little bit more surprisingly, the UN actually beat out President Obama. He was at 49% favorability. And in addition, 89% of Americans, 89% of the people that we spoke with, nearly 9 in 10, said they believe the U.S. should play an active role in the UN. And that's the highest that number has been since 2009. Finally, the new Sustainable Development Goals, the new global goals, they received a whopping 69% favorability. So you can see your efforts to build awareness, to lobby your elected officials, and to, more importantly, generally stand up for the ideals the UN represents. Those efforts are really paying off. But there's a lot more work to be done. Because a small caveat to that global goals favorability rating, that favorability rating of 69%, was that actually only 22% of people polled felt like they really knew enough about the global goals. And that's understandable. They just were adopted a few weeks ago. And that's why I'm here today. The UN General Assembly 1 month ago adopted the new Sustainable Development Goals. These goals are a diverse set of development targets to succeed the Millennium Development Goals that were first adopted 15 years ago in the year 2000. Now the MDGs provided the world a roadmap to work towards reducing extreme poverty and building global health capacities. We have the 8 original goals here on the screen. You can see while they're comprehensive, in some ways they're a little bit narrow when you think about some of the challenges that we're facing together right now. The MDGs inspired policies and investments that helped lift 600 million people out of extreme poverty, prevented 4.3 million deaths from malaria, and improved the lives of millions more. From 2000 to 2015, the number of primary school-aged children who weren't enrolled in school has been cut in half. 90% of countries have more women in their parliament or legislature since 1995. Nearly 84% of children worldwide receive at least 1 dose of the measles vaccine. And around the world, 2.1 billion people have gained access to improved sanitation. So you can see, the MDGs have made a huge impact on the lives of millions, really billions of people. They've proved one important thing: goals work. The new Sustainable Development Goals, or they're being called the global goals for short, build on the groundbreaking work of the MDGs, but this time create a to-do list for the entire world, developed and developing nations alike. And in addition to the health and poverty issues addressed in the MDGs, the global goals have been expanded to include vital challenges such as affordable energy, economic growth, and peace and justice. These goals, these 17 goals you see on the screen in front of you, these goals are going to drive the development agenda between now and the year 2030. They will determine how billions of private and public development dollars are spent. They're going to challenge all of us to do more. The list, honestly, couldn't be more timely, and it's sort of a great circumstance that the goals came, the MDGs, original MDGs, expired the exact year that we're celebrating the 70th anniversary. These goals, though, they didn't materialize out of thin air. The global goals, as opposed to the original MDGs, were developed through what Secretary General Ban Ki-moon called the most consultative process in human history. The goals were adopted by 193 member nations after 3 long years of public input and negotiation. Now, you know how slow Congress is to act sometimes, most all the time, actually. Can you imagine negotiating a global agreement between Peru and Botswana, India and New Zealand, Russia and Singapore? That's exactly what happened. Over 8 million people around the world had a chance to choose their own priorities for the goals through the My World website. And here at home, UNA USA held consultations in 50 cities across the country, engaging thousands of Americans from all walks of life. And the Northern California chapters were instrumental in making that happen. These consultations, the data that was obtained, the priorities that regular Americans inputted, that data was relayed to the Obama administration and taken to the world's largest negotiating team. And based on that feedback, the UN chose these 17 goals. The goals you see in front of you focus on achieving 3 extraordinary things: ending extreme poverty, fighting inequality and injustice, and fixing climate change. And unlike the MDGs, as I said, these goals are a to-do list for all countries, rich and poor, small and large. And in addition, member states are focusing on better data and stronger metrics to capture results. So while the MDGs' 8 goals featured 18 targets, the SDGs' 17 goals include 169 targets. Now, frankly, that is a lot of targets. It's a lot to memorize. The original MDGs, the 8 of them, they were printed on the back of all UN business cards. Very easy to remember. You had them right there. You handed your card to somebody, they had the information. It's a little bit harder to fit the 17 or the 169 targets on that business card. But the important thing is that whatever motivates you to value the work of the UN, whatever motivates you to be here tonight, to come to this amazing event, your issue is in these new goals. For example, a lot of the work we do at the Better World campaign focuses on the importance of UN peacekeeping. UN peacekeeping, with American drawdowns in Iraq and Afghanistan, is now the single largest deployed military on the planet. It's 130,000 troops and police from dozens of countries serving in 16 different missions across the world. And these missions, again, frankly put, they're in some of the worst places imaginable. Places torn apart by sectarian violence, by terrorism, by political instability, by age-old ethnic divisions. And the U.S., and this is the important thing that we try to do and try to communicate, the U.S. is the largest financial contributor to these missions. In fact, the U.S. is the largest financial contributor to almost all of the UN's work. The American taxpayer contributes about 25% of the entire UN budget. So we expect a lot of those taxpayer dollars, but we know that by contributing to the UN, we can get a lot more done, and it can be a lot more effective. In other words, anything the UN does, a lot of what the UN does, the US is instrumental in making it happen. When a peacekeeping mission is greenlit, the UN is tasked with entering one of these conflict zones and helping rebuild the foundations of a safe, functioning society. But that can't be done without rule of law, without free elections or strong, responsive institutions. And that's why it's so important that Goal 16, focusing on peace and justice, was included in the SDGs. It's something that wasn't touched upon in the original MDGs. Because it's not enough to deliver vaccines and food. Those are critical first steps. But what happens next? What happens when you recover from war, but there are no courts? What happens when a victim seeks justice, but there are no police? I've seen it firsthand in Liberia and Haiti, where the UN has been instrumental in training law enforcement and judges to ensure rule of law is not just an empty slogan. I visited a couple years ago Liberia. It was 1 month before the first Ebola death, with a couple members of Congress to see the work of the UN up close. We went to a jail, a police station, just a couple hours outside the capital of Monrovia, and we asked the police officers what they needed. We were expecting them to say, we need more vehicles, more jeeps, or we need more generators, or we need more weapons or resources, things like that. What they asked for was pretty simple. They said, we need typewriters. We don't have electricity in the office. When someone comes in to report a crime, something went wrong, we have to write it by hand. We don't have a computer, the computer won't run. We need a typewriter to make our job more effective. It's those small things, when you think about what the UN can do and should do, and what can be included and is included in the new SDGs, think about those new goals that are going to be impacting the work of those police and the work of a lot of people all over the world. Now, the new expanded global goals ensure the world's development community focuses not just on the right now, but what comes next. And because we've seen that the world, when it comes together, it can really, truly make a difference. The MDGs were an amazing beginning, but now it's time to concentrate that focus, that energy on the next set of problems. The global goals reflect our input, our interests, and our values as Americans, but also as global citizens. All the people, the students here gathered from all over the world, these goals aren't just an American priority, they're a global priority. And these goals are also attainable, but only if everyone works together. And that's why it's so important. You see Goal 17. It's sort of at the end, you may not think it's important, but it's the linchpin of this entire system. Because we've seen that when the UN works together with the private sector, it can accomplish amazing things. And frankly, it can't accomplish them without them. These aren't issues that just impact governments. These aren't issues that just impact voters. These are issues that impact private sector, private businesses and organizations. They need to work together with the UN, and they're seeing that that's a response that they're receiving. We need to make sure, like I said, that these goals are a priority, but also a necessity. And you have an amazing representative here in Congressman Berkeley. But if you're not from this area, or you have friends that are from different parts of the state or different parts of the country, please relay the message of the global goals to them. We need to make sure that our leaders in DC, whether they're your neighbors here, or they're 3,000 miles away, know that these goals reflect American priorities and American interests. So I want to thank you for having me here today, for supporting UNA USA. We have a little video we're going to be showing you about the goals. It's from the Global Poverty Project, and it'll just give you a little bit more information about what to expect in the next 15 years. Thank you.